Good morning, everyone. During the course of my lifetime, I have attended well over 100 weddings, either as an officiant or as a guest. And the two most spectacular weddings that I've ever been to have been the last two that I've been to. Actually, the one was at St. Paul's Cathedral down in Oakland, and following it was a spectacular reception in which there were tents over this 7-acre area. One was for hors d'oeuvres, another one was for soup and salad, another one for the main course, another one for desserts and dancing. And then there were these artists that were, spread throughout the whole event that were trying to capture it on canvas. And then the second wedding was down at First Presbyterian in downtown Pittsburgh, and it was during the Christmas season, so it was already very festive. And behind the pulpit, just as the wedding began, these giant doors open up, and there's this 40-foot Christmas tree that appears. It was just stunning. In fact, people were talking about both of these weddings for the next several weeks. There's something about weddings. I don't know if you've noticed it. There's something special about weddings. They're joyful, happy celebrations. They are grand. They're majestic. They're spectacular. And then there's royal weddings in which all this is on steroids. And if you were alive back in 1981, you might remember the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana. It was watched by, I think, 1 out of every 4 people on the planet, and probably the most spectacular wedding of all time. Well, that's the sense of the mood and the tone that you get as you encounter Psalm 45. It's a royal wedding. And there's this sense of anticipation, and there's this sense of grandeur that sort of surrounds it and what you should feel, which is a welcome relief from the 6 consecutive laments that we've been through. Let's just go through it, and I want to point out a couple things as we do. First of all, note the superscription under the psalm. It says, a wedding song to the tune of lilies. And there's been a long-standing tradition within Judaism that this is a messianic psalm that's looking forward to the royal wedding of the Messiah. And of course, in the New Testament, the writers are going to pick up the imagery of the bridegroom and the groom as being the church and King Jesus. When you get to the end of Revelation, all of history ends with this wedding feast of the Lamb. Well, as we read through it, I want you to think in terms of the description of the king, the description of the bride, and the description of the royal wedding. Beginning in verse 1, my heart is stirred by a noble theme, so I recite my verses for the king. My tongue is the pen of a skillful writer. You, talking about the king, are the most excellent of men, and your lips have been anointed with grace, since God has blessed you forever. Gird your sword on your side, you mighty one. Now, notice the kind of movement towards this conquering king. Think of the book of Revelations and the images of the book of Revelations. Clothe yourself with splendor and majesty. In your majesty, ride forth victoriously in the cause of truth, humility, and justice. Let your right hand achieve awesome deeds. Let your sharp arrows pierce the hearts of the king's enemies. Let the nations fall beneath your feet. Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. Think of the book of Revelation, a miniaturized version in compressed form. That's the way scholars sometimes describe this. Now, drop down to verse 9, and you'll see how the focus moves from the groom to the bride. Daughters of kings are among your honored women. At your right hand is the royal bride in the gold of Ophir. Listen, daughter, and pay careful attention. Forget your people and your father's house. Let the king be enthralled by your beauty. The city of Tyre will come with a gift. People of wealth will seek your favor. All glorious is the princess within her chamber. Her gown is interwoven with gold. Note the splendor of the wedding gown, still going on today. If you've ever watched Say Yes to the Dress. In embroidered garments, she is led to the king. Now it's beginning to move towards the royal wedding. Her virgin companions follow her, those brought to her to be with her. Led in with joy and gladness, they enter the palace of the king. Now notice the last two verses. Your sons, in other words, the sons and daughters of the king and his bride, will take their place, that will take the place of your fathers. You will make them princes throughout the land. I will perpetuate your memory through all generations. Therefore the nations will praise you forever and ever. You hear the echoes of the book of Revelations, don't you? The great wedding feast of the Lamb. You know, as I reflected upon this psalm, I thought, you know, how timely of the psalmist, after 6 consecutive laments, and in the midst of all this going on in our country, the social unrest that's tearing apart our cities, the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, to remind us where history is headed. Sin will not have the last word, but God's righteous judgment. And then the great wedding feast of the Lamb will take place. And the question that we all need to ask is, have you accepted the invitation of the groom? You see, you respond by saying yes to King Jesus' invitation, follow me.